The story you are about to hear is a reminder that hope can be found in the darkest of places. If you believe in second chances, please subscribe and give this story a like to support more narratives like this one. A biting October wind, smelling of damp earth and decaying leaves, swept through the iron gates of Crestwood Memorial Cemetery. It was a predator, searching for any exposed skin, any lapse in defense against the encroaching cold of the Halloween night. For Eleanor Ellie Vance, huddled between two stoic granite headstones, the wind was just another unwelcome companion in a life that had become a collection of them. She pulled the thin, threadbare blanket tighter around her shoulders, the fabric as porous as her hopes. It offered little more than a psychological shield against the chill that seemed to emanate not from the air, but from the very marrow of her bones. 47 years old, and this was her kingdom. A 6-by-3-foot patch of grass nestled between the final resting places of her parents, John and Mary Vance. This wasn't just any patch of grass. In a world that had cast her out, this small plot was the only place left that felt like home. Here, under the watchful gaze of a marble angel whose features had been softened by a century of acid rain, she felt a sliver of peace. The world outside the cemetery walls, the world of missed rent payments, foreclosure notices, and the ghosts of help-wanted signs, was loud and demanding. In here, there was only silence. A profound, final silence that paradoxically made her feel less alone. She could almost hear her mother's voice in the rustle of the leaves, a gentle hum telling her to keep her chin up. She could almost feel her father's steady presence in the unyielding strength of the old oak tree that stood sentinel over their graves. They had been gone for a decade, but here, their love was a tangible warmth against the cold. Halloween in Crestwood was usually a festival of light and laughter. From her vantage point on the hill, Ellie could see the distant glow of streetlights and the occasional flicker of a jack-o'-lantern on a porch. She could hear the faint, happy screams of children dressed as superheroes and monsters, their plastic pumpkin buckets filled with treasures. The sound was a bittersweet symphony of a life she no longer lived. She remembered carving pumpkins with her own daughter, Lily, her small hand struggling with the plastic knife, her face a mask of intense concentration. Where was Lily now? A different state, a different life, estranged by years of Ellie's bad decisions and worse luck. The shame was a heavier blanket than the one she wore. A group of teenagers, emboldened by the holiday, dared each other to enter the cemetery. Their laughter was sharp and nervous as they pushed through the gate, their flashlight beams dancing erratically over the tombstones. Ellie shrank back, pulling her knit cap down, hoping to blend into the shadows. They weren't malicious, just young and foolish, treating her sanctuary as a cheap thrill. They passed by, their voices fading as they ventured deeper into the cemetery, searching for manufactured scares, oblivious to the real, quiet horror of a life lived on the edge. Once they were gone, the silence returned, deeper now. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, a dull, persistent ache she had learned to ignore for long stretches. But tonight, it was relentless. It was then that she noticed it, a single, folded bill lying on the damp grass near the path, likely dropped by one of the teenagers. It was a $5 bill. To the kids, it was probably nothing, the cost of a coffee or a bag of candy. To Ellie, it felt like a fortune, a direct answer to a prayer she hadn't even dared to whisper. Her first instinct was to buy food, a hot coffee and a sandwich from the 24-hour convenience store across the street. The thought was so tantalizing it made her mouth water. She could almost feel the warmth of the cup in her hands, the steam rising to thaw her frozen face. But as she stood, her stiff joints protesting, another idea took hold, a foolish, desperate, and utterly captivating one. The store, a brightly lit beacon named the Corner Stop, stood directly opposite the cemetery gates. It was a place she actively avoided. It was the same store where her dad used to buy his newspaper every morning, and a lottery ticket every Friday. It was where he'd bought the ticket the week he had the heart attack, the numbers still unchecked in his wallet when he passed. The place was saturated with memories of a happier, simpler time. Going inside felt like a betrayal, like admitting how far she had fallen from the life her parents had worked so hard to give her. Clutching the $5 bill in her hand, its worn cotton texture a small comfort, she crossed the street. The automatic doors slid open with a cheerful chime that felt jarringly out of place with her mood. The air inside was warm and smelled of coffee and disinfectant. A young man with tired eyes and an indifferent expression stood behind the counter. He barely glanced at her. To him, she was just another shadow passing through. Ellie's gaze fell on the lottery display behind him. a vibrant cascade of colorful scratch-offs and slips for the big draws. The Powerball jackpot had been climbing for weeks. The advertised number was astronomical, a figure so large it was meaningless. $448 million. It was a joke, really. A tax on the poor, her father used to say, even as he faithfully played his numbers. You can't win if you don't play, Ellie Bean, he'd chuckle. She walked to the counter, her heart pounding a nervous rhythm against her ribs. "One Powerball ticket, please," she said, her voice raspy from disuse. The clerk slid a slip and a tiny pencil towards her. Ellie stared at the grid of numbers, her mind a blank. How did one even begin to choose? It felt like trying to pick a single grain of sand from a vast, endless beach. Then she thought of her parents. She thought of this place, this night. The numbers came to her not as a calculation, but as a memory. For the first number, she chose 12, her mother's birthday, December. For the second, 7, her father's July. Then 28, the day of their anniversary. The fourth was 58, the year they were married. The fifth was 32, the age her mother was when she had Ellie. Simple, sentimental, and utterly illogical. For the final Powerball number, she hesitated. She looked out the window back towards the cemetery. The old oak tree, a silent giant, stood silhouetted against the streetlights. Her father had planted it on the day she was born. She remembered counting its rings on a fallen branch as a child. She chose the number 47, her own age, a testament to her own survival. Right here, right now. She paid with the $5 bill. The ticket cost $2. With the $3 in change, she bought a steaming cup of coffee and a pre-packaged apple pie. The clerk handed her the ticket, a flimsy piece of paper that held the weight of an impossible dream. She didn't look at it, she didn't want to. It was better as a symbol of pure potential. Back in her sanctuary, the warmth of the coffee cup seeped into her frozen fingers. A small, profound luxury. She sat with her back against her mother's headstone, the granite now feeling less like a marker of death and more like a pillar of support. She slowly ate the pie, savoring every sweet, artificially flavored bite. It was the most delicious thing she had tasted in months. The coffee was gone too soon, its warmth fading from her hands and her stomach. The cold began to creep back in. Ellie carefully folded the lottery ticket and tucked it deep inside her worn sock, pressed against her ankle. The safest place she had. The draw was in a few hours, but she wouldn't know. She didn't have a phone or a radio. She would sleep, and in the morning, the ticket would still just be a piece of paper and the world would be the same. As the sugar from the pie and the lingering warmth of the coffee lulled her into a state of drowsy peace, she laid her head down on her bundled-up jacket. The sounds of the city, the distant sirens and the rumble of late-night traffic faded into a dull roar. The last thing she saw before her eyes drifted shut was the silhouette of the marble angel, its wings spread as if to shield her from the world. For the first time in a long time, as Eleanor Vance fell asleep in a cemetery on Halloween night, she didn't dream of the past. She dreamt of nothing at all, a quiet, empty peace while in a television studio miles away. 5 white balls and 1 red one were about to be chosen, preparing to change the world of someone who was completely unaware. The sun rose on November 1st, not with a gentle golden glow, but with a harsh gray light that filtered through the skeletal branches of the oak tree. Morning in the cemetery was a resurrection of reality. The magic and mystery of Halloween night evaporated with the dawn, leaving behind a world that was cold, damp, and unforgiving. Ellie Vance awoke with a familiar stiffness in her joints, a deep-seated ache that was a constant reminder of her circumstances. Her first conscious thought was of the cold seeping through her thin jacket. Her second was a vague, dreamlike memory of warmth and sweetness, the coffee and the apple pie. Then she felt it, the slight bulge in her sock, the crinkle of the paper against her ankle, the lottery ticket, a foolish, fleeting dream from a forgotten world. She sighed, the puff of her breath a small white cloud in the frigid air. It was time to face another day of the same endless struggle. She pushed herself to her feet, her body protesting every movement. The first order of business was finding a public restroom, and then figuring out how to get enough money for a cup of coffee to chase away the persistent chill. The corner stop across the street was her only immediate option. As she approached, her eyes still blurry with sleep, she saw a small crowd gathered near the entrance. A news van was parked haphazardly at the curb, its antenna extended like an inquisitive insect. Something was wrong, or at least, something was different. Curiosity, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time, nudged her forward. Taped to the inside of the glass door was a large, hastily printed sign from the State Lottery Commission. "We sold the winning Powerball ticket here," it screamed in bold, triumphant letters. Ellie's heart gave a single painful thud against her ribs. It was a coincidence. A cruel, cosmic joke. It couldn't be. People from this part of town didn't win things. They just tried to get by. She saw the clerk from last night, the one with the tired eyes now animated and wide-eyed, talking to a reporter. He was gesturing wildly, his 15 minutes of fame arriving on the back of someone else's impossible luck. Ellie's feet felt rooted to the pavement. A wave of nausea washed over her. It was absurd. It was impossible. But the memory of the numbers she'd chosen, her mother's birthday, her father's, their anniversary, flashed in her mind with sudden, startling clarity. She backed away from the crowd, her breath catching in her throat. She couldn't check the ticket there. She couldn't be seen. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the morning fog in her mind. She turned and walked, almost ran, back towards the silent sanctuary of the cemetery, her hand protectively clamped over her ankle. Behind the familiar shield of her parents' headstones, she sank to the damp ground, her fingers trembling so violently she could barely pull the ticket from her sock. It was crumpled and slightly damp. She smoothed it out on the granite base of the tombstone. Her hands were shaking too much to hold a newspaper, but she remembered the news van. People still had phones. Pulling out her own battered, screen-cracked phone was a useless gesture. It hadn't held a charge in months. Her mind raced. The library. It didn't open for another hour. An hour felt like a lifetime. Then she remembered the newspaper box at the corner, by the bus stop. She fumbled in her pockets, finding only lint and a few stray pennies. It cost $1. She felt a surge of despair so profound it almost made her laugh. To be potentially holding a ticket worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and to be thwarted by the lack of a single dollar coin. It was then that she saw him, an old man named George, who often sat on one of the cemetery benches, talking to his late wife. He was kind. He'd shared half his sandwich with her once. She walked over, her pride a distant memory. "George," she began, her voice a croak. Do you have a newspaper?" He looked up, his pale blue eyes kind. He simply handed her the local section of the paper he had already finished. "All yours, Ellie." She thanked him and hurried back to her spot, her heart hammering. There it was, in a small box on the front page, winning Powerball numbers drawn. She held the ticket next to the print, her eyes scanning back and forth, convinced they were deceiving her. 12. Match. 7. Match. 28. Match. 58. Match. 32. A wave of dizziness washed over her. 5 matches. That was already $1 million. She felt a tear slide down her cheek, hot against her cold skin. Then her eyes fell to the last number, the Powerball. She looked at the paper, 47. She looked at her ticket, 47. The world went silent. The distant traffic, the chirping of a persistent sparrow, the rustle of the wind, it all vanished. In its place was a roaring vacuum. The piece of paper in her hand, this flimsy $2 bet, was no longer a symbol of hope. It was a gateway, a cataclysm, a new life she had no idea how to live. She didn't scream. She didn't cry out. She simply folded the ticket, slid it back into her sock, and laid her head against the cold granite of her mother's headstone. And for the first time in years, she wept. She wept for her losses, for her mistakes, for the years of shame and regret. And she wept for this terrifying, impossible, beautiful second chance. Her first clear thought wasn't about a house, or a car, or even food. It was Lily. And with that thought came a new kind of fear. How could she possibly face her daughter now, showing up after years of silence, a homeless woman turned millionaire? It felt like the cruelest kind of punchline. The money didn't erase the past. It only illuminated the depth of the chasm between them. Ellie knew she couldn't stay here. The story of the winning ticket sold across the street would be everywhere. Sooner or later, someone might remember the disheveled woman who bought a ticket on Halloween night. She needed to disappear. With the clarity of a survivor, a plan began to form. Her first purchase wasn't a luxury item. It was a bus ticket to a city 2 hours away, bought with cash she received from pawning a small silver locket she'd kept hidden in her jacket lining, her mother's, the last thing of value she owned. In that anonymous city, she walked into a public library and spent 8 hours online. She wasn't looking at mansions. She was researching lottery lawyers and financial advisors. She learned about trusts, about anonymity, about how to protect herself. The next day, dressed in clean second-hand clothes, she made a phone call. Weeks later, after a quiet, legally shielded process, the Eleanor Vance Foundation was established. Its first project was not a monument to her own name, but a complete restoration and beautification of Crestwood Memorial Cemetery. The iron gates were repaired and repainted. The crumbling headstones were carefully cleaned and reset. The overgrown paths were paved with smooth new stones, and brilliant gardens were planted bursting with lilies and roses, her mother's favorites. The old oak tree was given special care by an arborist, ensuring it would stand for another century. The foundation's second initiative was a partnership with a local shelter to build Ellie's Place, a transitional housing facility for women, offering not just a bed, but job training, counseling, and a path back to dignity. But none of that mattered as much as the letter. It took her a month to write it, crumpled pages filling a wastebasket in her modest, rented apartment. She finally sent a simple, handwritten note to Lily's last known address, with no return address, just a P.O. box. It didn't mention the money. It simply said, "I am so sorry for everything. I never stopped loving you. If you are willing, I would like to try to make things right. I will be at the entrance to Crestwood Cemetery next Saturday at noon by the oak tree. I will wait for as long as it takes." That Saturday, Ellie stood by the restored gates, her heart a frantic drum. The cemetery was beautiful now, a place of vibrant peace, not somber neglect. She watched families walk by admiring the flowers. She watched the old man, George, sitting on a new, comfortable bench, still talking to his wife, but with a small smile on his face. Noon came and went. Then, 12:30. Then one aroused. Despair, a familiar old friend, began to settle in. She had been foolish to hope, and then she saw her, a young woman with her father's dark hair and her mother's determined eyes, standing hesitantly across the street. It was Lily. She was older, of course, with lines of worry around her eyes that Ellie knew she had helped put there. For a long moment, they just stared at each other across the road that separated the cemetery from the rest of the world. Then slowly, Lily crossed the street. There were no easy hugs, no miraculous instant forgiveness. The conversation was stilted, painful, filled with years of unspoken anger and hurt. Lily was wary, her questions sharp. Where had she been? Why now? Ellie answered honestly, speaking not of her winnings but of her regrets. She spoke of sleeping by her parents' graves, of the shame that had kept her away, and of the profound, desperate wish to have a second chance, not at wealth, but at being a mother. "I heard about the foundation," Lily said, her voice softening just a fraction. "I heard what you're doing for this place, and for other women like you were. I'm trying to honor them," Ellie said, gesturing towards the graves of her parents. "And I'm trying to become someone they would be proud of again." "Someone you could be proud of?" Lily was silent for a long time, looking at the transformed landscape, at the headstones that gleamed in the afternoon sun. "It's a start," she finally whispered. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. It was a bridge, fragile and new, across a chasm that had once seemed infinite. As they stood together, two strangers relearning how to be mother and daughter, Ellie looked at the magnificent oak tree her father had planted. The $5 bill had been an act of random luck. The numbers had been an act of love and memory. But this was the real jackpot, the chance to plant a new seed, to watch it grow, and to hope that this time she could nurture it into something strong and beautiful. True wealth is not measured by the dollar amount of a jackpot, but by the ability to rebuild the bridges we've burned and rediscover the profound value of family and community. Ellie's luck wasn't just about picking the right numbers. It was about finding the courage to use her second chance to heal old wounds. She transformed a place of personal grief and public neglect into a symbol of rebirth, proving that the greatest fortune is the opportunity to create a legacy of compassion, turning the soil of sorrow into a garden of hope for herself and for others. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey. If Eleanor's story touched your heart, please show your support with a like and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories.